All right, American history students, let's continue the learning from yesterday, or lesson two, excuse me, and let's continue on with the Philippine American War. So, again, we're going to be looking at imperialism and how it changed the role of the United States before World War One. And throughout this lesson, make sure you're listening for the effects of what this war offered. So, again, I highly encourage you to listen for, again, how anything relates to that definition of imperialism that we established in lesson one. So, getting right back into it, you remember that we just freshly bought the Philippines off of Spain for $20 million, and we immediately had a problem. We thought that if we leave them alone, Spain is just going to reconquer them, or they would be reconquered by another group of people. We also thought if we left them alone, that they might fall in a civil war, since we deemed them uncivilized. So therefore, we felt like we needed to inject ourselves in and basically be their conquerors, for a lack of a better term. But the only problem was this led to another war. So here's where I ask you the first question. Did the United States think the Philippines could rule themselves? So, going into how this led to another war, you're going to notice that it wasn't really a war. It was more or less of a conflict, and it's because it didn't last very long. So, imagine a superpower like the United States going against a small island like the Philippines. This is a very lopsided fight. So, Emilio Aguinaldo, I mentioned him in lesson two. He was a very big Filipino patriot, thought the best of his country, and he encouraged his people to use this thing called a guerrilla warfare. So, knowing that he was outnumbered, he encouraged people to hide in the jungles that they knew, storm in, do a bunch of fighting, and then exit very quickly so that way they wouldn't take as heavy numbers. And for the most part, it did kind of work, but then basically the powers of the American military are going to quickly defeat this. But you're going to notice that the fighting wasn't really much of fighting. So here's my question to you. Filipinos were happy with what the United States was doing, replacing the role of Spain. So, the actual happenings of the Philippine American War, you're going to notice that our soldiers were just jerks to the people of the Philippines. Since that guerrilla warfare was something you can't really predict, what we did is we rounded all of the citizens up of the Philippines in the different villages and stuff, and we put it in, for a lack of a better term, concentration camps. We wanted to observe their every movement, so that way we knew what was coming in this case. And if we did catch anybody outside of those concentration camps, we deemed no quarter, which basically means we are not taking prisoners. We are going to kill you. And you'll notice that we actually tortured some Filipinos to get the position where Emilio Aguinaldo was, and it eventually worked because we caught him. But the last thing that we did also is that we would do these raids where we would clean out the villages, and then once we were done, we set everything on fire. So that way we knew we checked it. So when Emilio Aguinaldo, like I said, when he was captured, you're going to notice that the war didn't really last much longer. This was their leader getting caught. So again, we don't have a leader. It's really tough to fight a war. So my question for you is, the United States soldiers, did they show mercy to the citizens of the Philippines? So now getting into the effects. Again, mental star on this slide, because this is going to be something that you might want to write about for the end of the unit writing. But you're going to see how many U.S. soldiers served and died at the very top. 100,000 served, 5,000 died. And again, most of that was from disease and sickness. It wasn't really from actual fighting. You can see how many Filipinos died. They were fighting for their liberty, their freedoms, whichever you want to call it. Cost us about $400 million. That's just a lot of money, of then money. And you could say the United States won. Now, I have won in quotation marks there just for the simple fact that we treated them very inhumanely, and we're kind of being hypocritical on how we were handling their freedoms, being the former British colony that we were. But you'll notice that the Philippines are going to remain under our control until 1916, right around World War One. And you're going to also see that we are going to take a lot of resources from this area of the world. But it did open the door for us to trade with China eventually. So, question for you. The United States was fully imperialistic over the Philippines once the war was over in 1903.